Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. This morning, we're going to look back on the Champions League win over Girona last night, as well as our Champions League group stage as a whole, which I think has been pretty good, all things considered. We'll talk about Ethan Nwaneri after his spectacular goal last night. And we'll also get into some of the transfer stuff which took place before yesterday's game. Talk of a bid for Ollie Watkins, which we understand is complicated by what's going on with John Duran. But what else might Arsenal be looking to do before the transfer window closes in just 4 days' time? Who else is out there that we might realistically bring in? We'll talk about that. Plus a bit on the decision to overturn Myles Lewis-Skelly's red card and lots more besides. We're just going to get straight into it. And with me to do that this morning is Andrew Allen. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. I'm okay. I'm sort of reflecting on Arsenal's Champions League group stage. Maybe it might be interesting to chat about that in a few minutes, because I think it is worth noting in a season where not everything has been perfect and not everything has been right in the Premier League. The Champions League group stage, elongated as it is in this new format, has gone pretty well. But we'll start with last night, obviously, and the 2-1 win over Girona. It's sort of, I don't know if it's pointless to analyse a game like this, because we all knew Arsenal were more or less going to finish in the top 8 anyway. So we kind of had to go through the motions a bit, do a job, if that's the right way of putting it. And I think the team selection that Mikel Arteta put out last night was certainly reflective of the importance, relatively speaking, of the game, and also the schedule that these players have been operating under in the month of January. This was game 9, I think, in the month of January. So there's been a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was as much rotation as he possibly could have made, really, in the circumstances, while maintaining a level of competitiveness, right? I mean, it wasn't a case of throw all the kids in, but he definitely gave minutes to players who've maybe been a little bit on the edges of things. I'm thinking Kivior, obviously Neto, who I'm sure we'll talk about, was the big one. I think Ødegaard and Marino coming back in was obviously a subsequence of them missing the weekend's game, so getting them back up to speed, I guess, ahead of the City game on Sunday. Yeah, I mean, he'd stressed all week about the importance of doing a job, and even though the Opta computer said we were kind of 99.9% certain of going through, Arteta still seemed to sort of play on that 0.01% chance of it not happening as a top 8 finish. So, yeah, I mean, I thought no huge surprises from the lineup, to be honest. No,
the only thing that stood out was the absence of David Raya, who did travel with the squad to Spain. Arteta said before the game he's not fit. When he was asked about him afterwards, he said he certainly couldn't play. He wasn't fit. He wouldn't expand at all on the injury. I've seen some people say, well, this is just, nothing. Arteta's playing a bit of mind games ahead of the weekend. Even if he was so inclined to give Neto his first Arsenal game, which I think we could all understand in the context of this particular fixture, I'm not 100% convinced that Arteta just leaves out David Raya for mind games, for shits and giggles, and has an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old on the bench. As very nearly happened in this game, we could have had to turn to the bench for a replacement goalkeeper because of the Neto, the goal that Girona scored, which could have resulted in a Neto red card. We'll come to that in a moment. So, are you concerned about the Raya situation? We're sort of light on info as it stands, but I have to say I'm a little bit worried about this, because I think he would, even if he was going to play Neto, he would have Raya on the bench rather than, with all due respect to Tommy Setford and Jack Porter, he'd have him there as a safety net.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because in theory, we took 4 goalkeepers with us to Spain, which is sort of unnecessary, right? Because you'd take 3 usually. Yeah. So we've taken 4, but we've also decided to take Raya, presumably thinking that he was going to be available in some capacity, but then for him not to be on the bench at all obviously suggests that there is an issue, because I don't think you just take him along for the ride so he can get the air miles, right? So yeah, I think it's worrying a little bit, but I mean, what can we do? I mean, he's basically said he's not fit, but he's not expanded on it. Nobody's pressed him on exactly why he's not fit or what's happened, when it's happened, because presumably if he was fit enough to go on an aeroplane on Tuesday evening, and then for him not to be ready on Wednesday, what's he done? Kind of slept badly in a hotel bedroom, cricked his neck. Is it something more serious? Is it, who knows? We can only speculate. So, yeah, I mean, if it wasn't City at the weekend, I'd maybe be a little bit calmer, but there's a level of nervousness, I think, added to the fact that we then watched Neto put in a performance which was hair-raising, to say the least.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that was really quite up there with some other Arsenal goalkeeper debuts we've seen in the past.
I mean, look, the moment quite early on where he got caught on the ball, first game for ages, getting used to a new team, whatever. I still would have some worries about a 35-year-old goalkeeper, not being experienced enough to deal with the opening minutes of a fairly nothing Champions League game. We'll come to that moment then when Girona went ahead. I know Arsenal had the ball in the back of the net through Calafiori. It was actually a nice little pass from Raheem Sterling. He's just about offside. Good finish, but he's offside. Flag goes up. And I think we were probably the better team in that period. But there's a collection of sort of not errors per se, but like Partey loses track of Danjuma. Kivior has pushed up and left a lot of space for Danjuma to run into. Calafiori is just a little bit behind the offside line, so he plays him onside. And then he goes through on goal, and Neto is, 5, 6, 7 yards outside his goal, or outside of his area, and tries to save the shot from Danjuma. I mean, what the fuck is going through his head there? Because I accept, right, that we ask our goalkeepers to play in a very specific way. We ask them to play high up the pitch. But when you're a keeper who is as experienced as he is, right, and he's played for Barcelona and he's played for Valencia and I think he's played for Juventus and he's played a lot of time in the Premier League, to be that unaware of your own surroundings and to attempt to make a save from outside the box, he and Arsenal got really, really, really lucky there, because if he saves that, if he touches that, it's a red card, because I think if he touches it, he pushes it around the post, the ball doesn't go in. We're down to 10 men, deservedly so this time, and we're calling on a kid on the bench to come in and play in goals. It wasn't great.
It was a mad moment. I think, there are a couple of things. I think, first of all, it was interesting listening to Danjuma after the game talk about how they'd done their homework and that they knew if Thomas Partey played at right back that Arsenal would push up. There'd be space there behind him. He doesn't have the pace to track back. So they obviously had that in their locker as a pass and a run to make. So that's one thing, okay? So, they picked a weakness. They took advantage of it. I think with Neto, you don't suddenly just become a bad goalkeeper, but I do think that everything that Raya does, we maybe underappreciate how complex it all is, because there's a lot going on with what Raya's doing. He's aware of his own positioning. He's aware of the positioning of other players. You have to be aware of where the ball is. You've also got to be very comfortable with your technique, whether that's controlling, passing, all the rest of it. And I do think, because we saw it last year with Ramsdale as well, when he came into the team on a couple of occasions, these guys are so aware of everything that they've got to think about, but they haven't done it in a match situation for so long that the reflex idea of it all just kind of goes out the window, and they're overthinking everything. And I think what we saw with Neto 100% yesterday was overthinking things that were just the simplest things to do, right? Control the ball, pass it on first, with his first action. And then this was just bizarre positioning. There's a bit of me that wonders almost as if he just stood there and watched the ball be whipped past him, whether he would have looked even more of an idiot, right? Because he's just standing there,
I don't know,
not doing anything. So he thought, well, I might as well sort of try and save it, but obviously I can't actually save it. It was just, it was up there with, I don't know. The first player that came to mind when I watched him was like, shit, he's as nervous as Runarsson or someone like that.
Okay. I had a sort of whiffs of Almunia a little bit when he would come out of his box and just not know where he was or read the game wrong, so it became easy for the opposition to take advantage of that. I
mean, obviously we saw Fabianski in the FA Cup final in the last minutes kind of completely walkabout as well.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of bad memories there that we're bringing up. But I mean, it was just like his brain was frazzled. Like he just couldn't quite cope with everything that he needed to be thinking about in that moment, and therefore even the basics went out the window. I don't think he's a bad goalkeeper. I certainly think he managed to put it behind him, and in the second half he was actually pretty good at claiming crosses, rolled the ball out well. I think he just had that moment, and it was like, okay, someone had to speak to him at half time and just go, mate, what are you doing? Like, you're okay. You're 35. You've done this before.
Yeah, relax, man.
We're not reinventing the wheel. Just keep calm. But yeah, I mean, it could have been really disastrous. I mean, it would have been interesting for I guess Tommy Setford, who I think we have to assume is above Jack Porter in the pecking order, even though Porter's had the game time this season in the Carabao Cup. I almost think it wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world, actually, if we'd played Setford above Neto anyway, because given the circumstances, Neto is obviously not a long-term option for us. He'll go back to Bournemouth at the end of the season. Setford has been brought in. He's not had any game time at all this season. He's had a few niggly injuries. We obviously see him, though, as a longer term option. But I mean, I can understand where Arteta's head was at. You brought this guy in, his experience. He's been at the club for 7 months. He's not played. Yeah,
exactly. You sort of default to experience in those situations a little bit. I think what's sort of forgotten in the aftermath of their goal is the fact they could have easily gone further ahead. There was a sort of moment of danger at 2-0 where we just about got back, and then Jorginho made a really, really good block after we'd lost possession again, and they came forward. There was a shot from inside the box, so we sort of rode our luck a little bit in that period despite going 1-0 down, but then got back into it through Jorginho from the penalty spot. Thomas Partey drives into the box. It's a very, very clumsy challenge from the Girona defender. I quite enjoyed the fact that for both of their penalties, they argued the case with the referee like some massive injustice had been perpetrated upon them, rather than one of the clumsiest challenges you'll ever see and one of the most ridiculous handballs you will ever see laid on. And we'll come to that, obviously. But I think important at that point for Arsenal just to sort of stem the tide a little bit. And Jorginho made no mistake from the spot. Quite interesting to see him step up and take the penalty.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably the most interesting, part of that whole action, right? That Ødegaard decided that he was going to defer to Jorginho, which I think is something that people were maybe calling for during the Manchester United FA Cup game when Ødegaard stepped up, and Ødegaard, who hadn't been in any form at all in front of goal, took that penalty, had it saved. People were looking, well, Jorginho is a penalty specialist, although he has missed penalties before. Yeah, interesting that he stepped up. Obviously, very trademark little hop and put it in the back of the net. As penalties go, that was a relatively low pressure one for him to deal with. I will be curious to see whether or not he, has that duty whenever he's on the pitch. Obviously, he wasn't by the end of the game, so that ruled him out of the Sterling one. But I mean, he took it well. I mean, as you say, it was funny watching them argue. I can only assume the Girona players thought maybe Michael Oliver was the referee there and they had a chance of having it overturned or something.
Michel Oliver, the French. Right, so he was Italian, wasn't he? So anyway, look, I won't go there. The highlight of the game, and I think probably the most interesting and exciting and invigorating part of this performance, this 90 minutes, was Ethan Nwaneri. And on his first Champions League start, he scored his first Champions League goal, and what a really good goal it is. You know, it's one of those where when it hits the back of the net, I always find like some of the best goals look really simple. So you think to yourself, why don't they just do that all the time? If they can do that once, why can't they do it 3 times a match? I know that's absurd, and I've watched football for long enough to know that it is absurd, but that's just kind of where my brain goes. But he executes it so well, you know, that move across the box, shifts it onto his left foot. It is mad, isn't it, that he is 17 years of age. This was only his 22nd appearance for Arsenal, maybe his, 6th or 7th start. I don't know how many games he started in that period because he's had quite a lot of substitute appearances and short cameos. So the vast majority of his appearances have been from the bench. But already he's kind of got a trademark move and a trademark goal where that ability to work a shooting position on his left foot and then absolutely crack a shot is not synonymous with him. But when you look at him, you think, oh, I know he can do that already, and he's 17 years of age. It's phenomenal, really, the potential that he has and the decision-making that he has around the penalty box, his movement into the box, his movement into spaces, to pick up the ball, to look for passes, and that ability to finish, and actually finish with some power as well. I know we've got a lot of players who are a bit feathery in terms of their finishing, whereas we don't have enough players who really put their foot behind the ball. This finish was powerful, it was controlled, and the precision was unerring.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a level of inevitability about Nwaneri now, isn't there? I mean, you kind of watch him dinking off the right flank onto his left foot. You know, his left foot's like an elastic band. You can kind of sort of see him winding it back, and then it's back, and you just know what's going to happen, and then he releases, and he generates so much power and whip, and you know, not for the first time this season, it's kind of scraping the post or going right on the postage stamp in the top left-hand corner. And what I love, I mean, as I was saying, inevitable. I mean, the crowd sense it. You know, I'm sitting there watching at home and I'm going, go on, get on your left foot, have a go. And the defender knows what's coming. The keeper probably knows what's coming. And yet they just don't seem to be able to do anything about it. And I think when you look at other players who had that quality, I think in the match report last night, I compared him to Arjen Robben, right? You know, it is a trademark move that people know he has, and yet he's still able to execute it. And that's an incredible quality. And I think when you see someone be that clinical from the edge of the box, you can understand why Arteta has spoken about him in the past about being potentially a striker, because he just knows where the goal is, and when he puts his head down, he knows how to find it. And as you say, unlike a lot of the players in the team, he hits the ball, you know, really truly. I mean, you know, it's a bit laces, it's a bit kind of you know, top edge of your foot, I guess. He just a lovely technique. I mean, and the other thing is that, I mean, he really sends the ball flying. I think when you see Saka come off that side, I mean, Saka has hit the top corner a couple of times, but quite often he goes low with his shots. You know, there's more of a kind of, not Overmars-esque, but there's a proclivity for lower shots, whereas Nwaneri really just goes, I'm going to hit this as hard as I can and just find the top corner. And I love that because they're so aesthetically pleasing. Yeah.
Do you think a goal like this will have any significant impact on how Mikel Arteta views Ethan Nwaneri? Because obviously we're light at this moment in time when it comes to attacking options, where Saka is sidelined, Jesus is out now for however long. Sterling isn't really doing it. We'll come to him in a moment. But a goal like this on the big stage, and I know it's not the biggest European game we've ever played, and it's certainly not the biggest European game that I think he will ever play, but it's the winning goal away from home in a Champions League game with a slightly weakened team, having come from behind. The potential for this guy to make an impact in games is obvious, right? When you look at the numbers that he has this season, the sort of end product is there from a very limited amount of minutes. So each moment like this feels like a bit of a step forward. And I'm not saying he has to convince Arteta of his talent or his quality. I'm sure seeing it on the training pitch every day, Arteta is well aware of it. But in terms of using him in the first team with greater frequency, I feel like, that kind of goal gives a manager assurance. I sort of likened it, was it earlier in the season when Lewis-Skelly, did he get his first start against Monaco? Am I right in thinking that his first Champions League start was against Monaco?
That's right. Yeah.
And he came in and played really, really well. Really well. And since then, Mikel Arteta has been more inclined to use him than not. There have been moments where other players have come in. And I do wonder if this might be the moment where Arteta thinks, okay, this is what I've got here. I need to use this.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're now looking at a toss-up between using Nwaneri or Sterling on the right as a replacement for Saka, well, one is producing end results and the other's, trying his best but struggling. And I think, ahead of Sunday's game, who do I want to see on the right wing against Manchester City? I want to see the 17-year-old kid who's just, opened his account in the Champions League, become the second youngest English player to score in the Champions League after Jude Bellingham. So it's not bad company to be in.
No.
He's fantastic. I mean, I think for me, circumstances have obviously afforded Nwaneri the opportunities here. Saka's been out. I think, if anything, Arteta was very, very conservative about his use of Nwaneri in the opening parts of the season. I think we watched him come on against Spurs and he was brilliant away from home. He was just so composed. And I thought to myself, well, hang on a second, this kid is ready. Like, other players came on in that game, way more experienced and sort of didn't quite do what they needed to do, but he did. He kept the ball. He just strikes me as being very, very dependable and nothing seems to faze him. And I think if you can come in and be reliable, doing the job that you need to do, but also being able to express yourself at this level, I think that's incredible. I think when Arsenal had Reece Nelson coming through the academy years ago under Arsene Wenger, he was obviously playing he was so good for that level that, he had to be tested at first team. But when he came into the first team, he looked like he was overthinking things. He didn't look able to kind of produce the same magic moments. If anything, he played well within himself, and that just became a thing in his head, I think, and it took him a few years to maybe overcome that. Whereas with this kid, you just watch him and it's like, well, it doesn't matter whether it's Girona in the Champions League or if it was an under-18 game, he's doing the same thing over and over and over. And I think, oh God, we're so lucky to have that. So just keep pushing him. I mean, obviously don't push him to the extremes that you're worrying about him physically week in, week out, because I think there's still some room there for improvement. I certainly remember watching him in the early rounds of the Carabao Cup and he kind of ran out of puff after about an hour. He looks fitter now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But I don't think we need to be afraid about how we use this kid anymore. He is top class.
No, I completely agree. And I have no reservations about throwing him into any game against any opposition. And that is, a real testament to what he has produced and what he showed us on the pitch, because you can see a young player and you can say, yeah, they've got something. They've got a bit of talent, but are they quite ready yet? Are they physically mature enough yet? Are they mentally mature enough yet? And I think with this guy, you're looking and saying, well, the answer to all of those questions is yes. And every time we see him, there seems to be something new or something else which it was sort of copper fastens that idea, So it's a brilliant, brilliant goal. Ultimately turned out to be the winning goal. He gets man of the match on his first European start. I'm not saying necessarily he's announcing himself to European football, but this is obviously going to be the first of many, many European goals for Arsenal, hopefully over a long period of time.
I mean, I think he is announcing himself to Europe because you look at those kind of golden boy lists and stuff like that. Watch his name be on those, in the contenders next year. He will 100% be one of the highest regarded talents of his age group. It's really, really exciting. I mean, I didn't think anything good could come of the Saka injury, but this is certainly a silver lining.
Yeah. Maybe so. Maybe so. As Arteta's often said, there is an opportunity for somebody else when you sustain an injury like that to Saka. So there is a bit of a parallel there as well, isn't there? You know, a young guy, left-footed, come through the Hale End Academy. He's stepping into the breach while Saka's out, and hopefully he can, go some way to holding the fort in that regard. But look, a hugely exciting player and massive potential, and good to see him trusted from the start last night, and good to see him deliver as well. So the rest of the game, look, there were moments here or there. There were some set-piece moments for Arsenal where it didn't quite go in the back of the net. There was a Trossard shot, I think, that hit the bar. Girona had the ball in the back of the net. It was disallowed for offside, much to the dismay of the TNT Sports commentators, which I found a little bit strange. They were almost like crying into their fucking cornflakes over this. Like, did they have money on that or something?
I think there was a bit of a narrative around Stuani and, having been at the club and been a bit of a club legend, coming off the bench to try and get a goal. Because I saw that in the post-game comments that Michel, the Girona head coach, said we basically consider that to be a goal because the pictures of him celebrating that goal will always be there, even if it was disallowed. So I feel like maybe there was a bit of a narrative in the press room and around the game that maybe we as Arsenal fans didn't wholly appreciate. But yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, they were desperate for a little bit of added action, weren't they? I mean, given that they were reporting on effectively a dead rubber.
Yeah, I mean, he's 38, I guess, so maybe this is his last season. I don't quite know. But listen, it's fair to say I didn't, and I'm sure you didn't, and most of the people listening to this did not share the dismay of the TNT Sports commentators when that goal was rightly disallowed for offside, as Arsenal's was in the first half. I
mean, we should maybe just, it's not a new thing, but the automated offsides, fantastic. Yeah. Like, it takes seconds. No time.
Yeah, because initially when they scored their goal, I was like, oh, that's offside. When I looked at it, I looked across the line. I didn't see Calafiori. I looked across the line. I saw, Kivior stepped up, Gabriel stepped up, and he certainly looked ahead of those and looked ahead of Thomas Partey as well. But he timed his run very well. But yeah, I mean, we're going to come to PGMOL in a bit because we'll just discuss the Myles Lewis-Skelly thing. But yes, this is the sort of technology that should have been introduced in the Premier League this season. They said they were going to do it. It was going to be introduced in October, I think, and then for whatever reason they've decided against it. Typically, from what I understand, PGMOL have decided to go with a completely different company and a completely different system than the one that's being used in European competition and in international competitions because, of course, why wouldn't you just go with something that's industry standard and seems to be working well? It worked well in the World Cups. It worked well in the Euros. It's working well at Champions League level. When you see the replays, you just go, well, why can't we have this? Why don't we have this? But
yeah. I mean, I think it also just takes the pressure away from the VAR guys, right? Yeah. It's one less thing for them to have to worry about, so they can focus on other decisions on the pitch, right? If offside and getting the rulers out and all the rest of it, it should, in theory, take some of the pressure off.
Sure, yeah. They can concentrate on getting things just as wrong as the referee on the pitch. Make sure that there's that consistency of decision making. Did or have you ever seen a player look more like they were going to miss a penalty than Raheem Sterling when Arsenal got that late penalty, which could have added a little bit of gloss to the scoreline?
I mean,
is that just sort of projecting our own negative feelings about how Raheem Sterling's loan has gone on him, or is there more to it? Because I looked at it and went, I don't feel confident about him scoring this. I had a number of texts going, he's going to miss, before he even took it. I know maybe it's sort of confirmation bias of some kind, but I did not at all feel confident about him taking that penalty.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, the situation that came to mind for me was the Havertz against Bournemouth one a couple of seasons ago, when he was given the ball just to get a cherry on top goal, and he tucked it away, and you were desperately hoping that Sterling would do the same, because I have to say, I genuinely felt like he was pretty bright last night. He did a lot of reasonably good stuff, especially in the opening stages. You know, there was the dangerous pass for Calafiori, which he tucked away and was offside, and then there was a shot that went just wide, and I thought his dribbling was decent, and it was just like the game was starting to drip away from him a little bit. And obviously when he got booked for the dive, which wasn't a dive, I don't feel, and probably wasn't a penalty either, but It wasn't a dive. He was obviously frustrated. He was desperate to make something happen. Teammates gave him the ball. He wanted it. And then I think it was just very much a penalty from a guy who was hoping the goalkeeper would go the wrong way. Right? Nobody argues about that. If the goalkeeper goes the other way, it's fine. You know, it's a fine penalty. It's not an ideal height maybe, but if the goalkeeper goes the wrong way, nobody talks about it. But he played a very safe option as a striker. You're hitting the ball the way you want to, you know, you're pointing, your body's going. It's the natural direction to hit the ball. And the keeper just guessed and they made it look pretty easy. I have to say, when he stepped up, I didn't think he would score. And I think if you'd done a straw poll in that exact moment is when he kind of picked up the ball and put it down on the spot, I think most Arsenal fans would have probably gone 70-30 against him scoring, just because that felt like the way things were going for him. I mean, ultimately, it's the absolute worst of both worlds, isn't it? I mean, you've given him the opportunity and then he's fluffed it and he's just added to the misery for himself. Yeah. I don't really know where he goes from here. He just sort of needs something to bobble in off him and hopefully he can, do that. But I don't know. Maybe a winning goal against his old club on Sunday would be fine for me.
Listen, I would take it in a heartbeat, of course. And look, I understand why they gave it to him. I completely understand why, because he's a guy who's so desperately in need of a boost of confidence that this could have been a little bit of that. I don't mean to say that would spark him back into life and we'd see the Raheem Sterling of old because he scored a penalty in the 91st minute against Girona in a game we were already winning. But, there was also part of me going, I just want my striker to step up and take this, put it away, whether it's Kai Havertz. I think there could have been a benefit for Martin Odegaard or indeed Kai Havertz to take that penalty too after what happened in the FA Cup. They both could have done with scoring a penalty last night, and longer term perhaps that's the bigger benefit to Arsenal rather than trying to spark life into a guy who's, I agree with you, he was brighter last night than he has been in previous games, but it's a low bar, and I think his penalty record, I've just looked it up here, he's taken 10 penalties in his life, scored 4, missed 6.
Right, okay.
So...
never again then.
Never again, please. I
mean, it doesn't really help his cause at the moment that he has a young buck that he's competing with who is just making everything look so bloody easy at the moment. Right.
Sure.
Because the automatic thing you do as a supporter is go, well, that guy can do it. This guy's over the hill. He can't do it. He can't even do the easy things now. This guy's doing the impossible things and he's only 17. And I do wonder whether he's sort of feeling a little bit of that. I mean, he seems very supportive of Nwaneri's talent, obviously. I mean, I don't think there's anything to suggest otherwise, but they are competing and he must be feeling frustrated. I mean, it's almost like, we're getting old. When your body's starting to give up on you a little bit.
Thank you for using the word getting. I appreciate that. The gerund is very much appreciated.
And I
there,
included
Andrew.
myself in it as well, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's good too. That's good too. You're a good man. Deep down, you're a good guy. So look, it was a bit of a frenetic ending to the game. Obviously, the penalty. The referee decided, I think with about 15 minutes to go, I'm not going to bother give anyone any free kicks anymore. We'll just see what happens. Let it develop a little bit of rollerball energy. But look, we came out on top, 2-1 win in the end, away from home. It means we finished third in the Champions League table, which is obviously handy because we don't have to go through that extra qualifying round. I think last night was the first time we conceded a goal from open play in the Champions League, which is very impressive. 16 goals, 3 conceded, 19 points, 1 game lost in the Champions League. I think it's a very good, a very solid group stage for Arsenal. When you consider some of the games that we did have to play, we had We had Inter, I know, who finished in fourth, but, we dealt with PSG very well at home.
I think Atalanta away, given where it fell in the timetable and with the injury issues, was a big result, right?
Yeah.
Proving that we weren't going to just roll over and lose in those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
We're very unlucky against Inter. Shouldn't have lost that game at all.
No, I agree.
I have to say, Inter only conceded one goal in the entire of the group phase, which is incredible, really.
It's the most Italian European football thing I can think of, actually. 11 goals scored, 1 goal conceded, and they won 6 of their 8 games with just 11 goals scored.
Yeah, so, it underlines the importance, though, of having a very good defence, and that's one thing you absolutely cannot deny. Arsenal have a fantastic defence, and we've managed to mix it up over the course of this group stage and still prove that against very decent opposition. So that does bode very, very well. The draw, a bit of a head scratcher, but
you understand. You sent me a graphic last night, and I looked at it for about 40 seconds, and then closed my laptop because it was fucking making my head hurt. So I hope you've got it worked out.
The thing that confused me was obviously your position in the table influences who you get in the next round, whether that's us in the top 8 or the other teams that have qualified below us. But what I couldn't get my head around was why they then decided that they still needed to throw in a draw of some sort. So obviously, for the teams in 9th to 24th, they know that they'll play one of 2 teams, but for some reason they decided to throw in a draw on whenever it is the next couple of weeks, which will decide who those teams are. It's almost as if they've just gone, well, we need to have ourselves a day out in neon and a big kind of Pedro Pinto fest and, all the rest of it, show some highlights, big montage. But it seems kind of pointless, right? You could have just said, well, okay, 9th plays 24th, 10th plays 23rd and all the rest of it, but they haven't done that. So it means that our opponents are still a little bit up in the air, but we know it'll either be Italian or Dutch.
So it's one of Feyenoord, PSV, Juventus, or AC Milan.
Yeah.
So, it could be worse. Could be a lot worse, in fairness, when you look at some of the other teams. The top 8 were Liverpool, Barcelona, Arsenal, Inter, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Lille, and Aston Villa, who crept in there last night with a win over Celtic. And then you go all the way down to the top 24, and in there you've got Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, PSG, Manchester City, of course, Juventus, Sporting, who we played earlier in the competition as well. So, I think it takes a big weight off, doesn't it? The fact that we do not have to deal with another qualifying round to get into the knockout stage proper. It means a couple less games, which is obviously very welcome after the schedule being the way it is as well. And I think it gives us some scope to get away, and everyone can pile into Ben White's Dubai Airbnb and have a lovely time and soak up some vitamin D.
Yeah, I think what we've now got a 10-day gap between the second leg of the Carabao Cup at Newcastle and the Leicester away game, right? And all the talk is that they'll try and get away somewhere, do a bit of a warm weather camp. Arteta says he can rest some players, might get some players back. There'll be tactical opportunities there. I think more than anything, it will just be an opportunity to mentally reset. So much has been made of Dubai last year. That everyone's been talking about it as if, okay, well, if we do this again, we'll be guaranteed to come back stronger and all the rest of it. It's almost as if you expect Arsenal to come back from that and then lose to Leicester. But yeah, it's good. He seems quite excited about, watching more Champions League action and seeing who we might get and how we might tackle those tests ahead. I think I'm right in saying that as a result of the draw as it is, we're probably going to have a very, very tough quarter-final, because there is City, Bayern, Real, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen. I think Celtic are the easiest one in that path, and I can't see Celtic making it. So it does mean that something big is on the horizon, potentially, if we got through, but let's take it one at a time.
Yeah.
Frankly, the fact that we have to play City and then Newcastle, 2 games that will basically define the rest of the season on the domestic front is, that's enough for us to be thinking about right now.
Yeah, look, and look, ultimately when you do, if, taking nothing for granted about that first knockout round against, some good teams, but if you do get to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, you should expect to be playing the best teams in Europe. And that's something we'd have to contend with regardless of the format of the draw or the format of the competition anyway. Last year it was Bayern Munich. It could have been somebody else just as strong. I think that the point you make about going away, by the way, sure, I think there's a real need to get, just let the lads decompress, not turn over a new leaf, but at least sort of go, right, we've got that. Now we've got to look forward to all of this, and they can decompress and they can just sort of switch off for a little bit. But I think the other idea of having a bit of time to work on some things tactically is worth mentioning, because at the moment there really isn't much time to do that on the training ground, because it's play, recover, play, recover, play, recover, play, recover, basically, or play, recover, travel, play, recover, travel, and that doesn't leave you with a great deal of time to do much in terms of tactical work or different things on the training ground. By the time we go away, we may or we may not have another player or two in the squad to work with. We don't know that yet. We'll talk about that now in a second. So that aspect of, okay, let's say you bring in somebody, what can they do? How can they give you a different option? How can they tweak things, in terms of how you play, your style of play? Those aspects might be very interesting as well for that away trip or that trip to wherever we go, if we can make it happen.
Yeah, a whole week of just practicing corners. Imagine the number of goals we'll score from.
Yeah. While Neto stands outside the box trying to catch the ball, going, I'm not having much luck here, guys. What's happening?
It's definitely important. I know that in the past, Arteta has said that he's always had ideas about how he might evolve the team mid-season, but you don't want to overload the players with information when the games are kind of coming so thick and fast. But yeah, how much can you do in a week, really? It's funny, isn't it? It would effectively be 5 days probably on the training ground, maybe a couple of sessions each day, but you're not going to push them.
No.
At the same time, you need them just to, as you say, just to chill out and mentally relax a bit. So, but it's good. I think it'll be good for the fans as well, right? We've had so much bloody football recently. I need a few days to decompress myself. Off. It feels like it's just like bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
Press conference.
All of a sudden, the worldwide consumption of podcasts falls by fucking 50% because there's no Arsenal games. Right, well, let's talk about what the story before the game yesterday was a very interesting one, and that was that Arsenal made an official bid for Aston Villa striker Ollie Watkins. I know it's maybe a moot point at the time of recording, because I think it looks like Aston Villa are going to sell Jahan Duran to a Saudi Arabian club, Al Nassr, for 70 odd million. They have to sell somebody because of PSR, and this seems like the best way for them to do it. It certainly sounds like Unai Emery is far more on board with the idea of selling Duran than he is of selling Watkins. But I think it's an interesting debate, and obviously it raged online and everywhere else about Arsenal signing a 29-year-old striker for a fee which could be in the region of 60 million, although from what we understand, the initial bid was nowhere near the 60 million, which might be part of why it was rejected anyway. Where do you stand on that as an investment in January on this particular player?
I think it all comes down to the fee, doesn't it? If Arsenal were picking up Ollie Watkins, an established England international, for 50, 60 million, and they really felt that he could get us over the line, the title, and probably give us a good couple of years, then I, as a supporter, would probably be on board with that, even though I recognise it's probably not the long-term solution to an issue we've had. I think it's almost as if we go, here's a replacement for Gabriel Jesus, we still accept that we need to buy someone else, and we'd go and get that person.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
The whole thing to me felt a bit opportunistic, right? obviously Arsenal had got wind that Villa were open to selling Duran, and they probably looked at the situation and said, well, hang on, maybe they might want to hold on to the 20-year-old guy who seems to be having a good moment. Maybe they'd be open to selling the 29-year-old guy. Why don't we test the waters and see what happens there? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, which is the really cynical way of looking at it, was Arsenal lodged a bid that they were never going to, for a player they were never going to get, but it made it look like they were trying, and that plays as a bit of PR at this time of the window when really we've not been linked with anyone in any kind of concrete terms. I think, it's something that West Ham do all the time. West Ham bid for John Duran earlier in the window. It was a sort of like, well, hey, look, guys, we're trying. We've offered 50 million for Duran. That's the cynical way of looking at it. I think maybe we thought if they're willing to sell one striker, maybe they'll be willing to sell the other instead. And we tried our luck. Yeah. And I think the story kind of came and went in that exact moment. And actually, obviously, they've gone with Duran.
There is some logic to that, from an Arsenal perspective, where you say, well, this is their last chance to cash in on a 29-year-old player, whereas they could keep the guy, as you say, who's 2021. I think with Duran, there are probably aspects of his behind-the-scenes situation which make Watkins a far more preferable guy to keep. And look, I have to say I understand why Mikel Arteta would want Ollie Watkins. Completely understand it. He's a guy who has 60 goal contributions since the start of last season, 38 goals and 22 assists. Most of those have been in the Premier League. He's 29. I know there's sort of shades of Aubameyang, but from what we understand about Watkins, and with all due respect to our former captain, he's a little more professional in his overall approach. But you can understand why people would also have reservations. You'd understand why 60 million on a 29-year-old might have an impact on what we can do in the summer. Because if people have their eye on a Sesko or a really, really long shot, let's say Newcastle fuck up the rest of their season and end up in, 8th, and they've got the Europa Conference League, you have a hard time convincing Alexander Isak that Newcastle is the place to be. Therefore, it opens the door if you can put together a package that Newcastle might consider acceptable for that player, right? But I think if you do 60 million on Ollie Watkins now, that doesn't happen. I don't think it can happen because A, you've spent a good chunk of money, and B, you have blocked the pathway, or you've sort of invested in a guy for 2-3 years. I think you could get like two and a half seasons out of Ollie Watkins. Really good output for Arsenal. Is that worth 60 million? It is if he helps us go on and win a title. But I also understand at the same time why people would have some reservations about that kind of spending in January and on a player who, I think is a good player, but like, I don't quite know how to express it. I just would not feel comfortable spending £60 million on Ollie Watkins, despite the things that I've said about understanding why Mikel Arteta would want to go for it.
Yeah, I suspect the offer was nowhere near that. And I think we probably were looking at this as, we know the player would love to come to Arsenal because he's an Arsenal fan. Yeah. He's said that publicly in the past. Personal terms probably wouldn't be a problem. We'd be able to give him a bump in his wages. If we could do it for 35, 40 million quid, this is a risk, or not even a risk, this is an opportunity worth pushing for. We'll test the water, see what happens. If it blows up, it blows up. But, we gave it a go. Yeah. And I think it's probably with that cap on that they tried it. I don't think they really would consider going for him for 60 million quid, because I do think that's a lot of money to be paying for a guy of his age, even though there's nothing to suggest that he would be, incapable of playing for the entirety of whatever contract we gave him, even if that was 4 years. Look, I think maybe the fact that this has come out a few days before the close of the window, that nobody else is on the horizon, suggests that we are struggling to find someone who fits the bill. And I think Arsenal fans are probably going to have to start making their peace with the fact that we're not going to find the ideal candidate now, because the ideal candidates, Sesko, Isak, all the rest of it, are not available. They are not available.
I mean, even Sesko's not an ideal candidate, but he's sort of a player that you you say, well, maybe he has the potential to develop into something that is ideal and beyond. Like, I don't think there's any guarantees. Like, if you were to say, right, tomorrow, there's no money on the table, you can have one of Ollie Watkins or Sesko in your team, I think you would pick Watkins because he's got a track record. He's got the track record of doing it. It's just, the whole 29 thing grinds people's gears and all the rest of it.
I think Arteta was asked about whether there was room for adding more experienced players this month to a squad that has got quite a few experienced players. And I think he's probably looking at it, well, if you take out Jorginho and you take out Thomas Partey, two older players, and you have Lewis-Skelly, Nwaneri coming through, maybe this Sver Nipan kid might come in as well, you're suddenly lowering the average age by a significant amount. So you then layer in an Ollie Watkins, it doesn't look so bad, right?
Yeah.
So I can sort of see it from that perspective. He seemed perfectly open to adding experienced players to the squad, Arteta. So long as they can make the team better. Of course. I think, in the short term, Watkins would make Arsenal better because we do not have a player of that profile at the moment.
And we've got one centre forward. As I said, though, the discussion at this moment in time, at the time of recording anyway, is basically moot because what we understand is Duran is going to go to Saudi Arabia. There's a medical, according to David Ornstein, a medical booked for him in London today, and then there's a £70-odd million move. So if that happens, I don't think there's any way that Villa allow Ollie Watkins to leave. It means that Arsenal have got to look elsewhere. There's significant interest, which is real interest in Mathys Tel, the France under-21 international, who wants to leave Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich director Max Eberl says, yes, he wants to go, loan or permanent. We will assess all the options. I've rarely had so many clubs call me about a player before. So there is I'm not going to say a race necessarily for this guy, but there will be a lot of clubs interested. I'm sure Tottenham will be interested. There's talk of Man United being interested. There's talk of Chelsea being interested. I think if this was a player that Arsenal really set their sights on, they could definitely bring him in ahead of any of those clubs because, why would anyone in their right mind join Tottenham? Man United are a basket case at this moment in time. Chelsea, they just sort of bring players in, discard them along the way. When they don't fancy them anymore, they give them a special milkshake, which shows that they've failed a drugs test. I think Arsenal would be an easy sell to Mathys Tel. He's a good player. I like him. I think he's got the ability to play across the front line. I know he hasn't played a great deal for Bayern. I was asking Lewis about him a bit today as well, and Lewis obviously knows the Bundesliga very well. He said he would be thrilled to bring this guy in. Can play left, can play central, can play on the right. Maybe that's where we need to go. I know Arteta, when he gets a thing in his mind, if he wants Ollie Watkins is the guy he wants, and after that... But I think if you're looking at what the market is presenting you right now, that's certainly a deal that we could explore.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I watched a pretty long scouting video about him yesterday, and I guess he's maybe still a bit raw. Mm-hmm. He's not developed quite in the way that maybe Bayern were hoping since they bought him a couple of seasons ago. And he cost a hell of a lot of money when they bought him as a 17, 18-year-old. He was... he came with a lot of weight on his shoulders, I guess. But it also says something about him that he's not willing to just sit things out at Bayern Munich and he's keen to develop and he's made his decision and he wants to go and play and he knows that he can be a bigger player. So in terms of the versatility that he offers, obviously that would be useful right now because we're a team that's all about versatility. Can you fill in here because so-and-so is not available? So I think there's something there, but I don't think this is a guy who's suddenly going to be your central striker. He's not Ollie Watkins. He's not a guy that we're suddenly going to start playing up front instead of Havertz, and he'll go and get us 10, 15 goals between now and the end of the season. Mm-hmm. That's not who this guy is, but he would be another option and a very useful one, and potentially a cheap one if we could get him on loan and then there was an option to buy. And, but it's all going to come down to the player, isn't it? I mean, Bayern Munich, if they have an option to sell him permanently may well take that. If it's an obligation to buy, they'll probably prefer that. So we're gonna really have to sell the project to him, Tail, if we're going to get this over the line.
Yeah,
if indeed we want to.
He feels more like a player who fits the project, if you like, and Watkins would definitely be a now signing. But look, there are 4 days left in the window. I suppose the one thing you would say about the Watkins situation is that it demonstrates that the money is there, that the ownership or the finances have been arranged in such a way to facilitate a deal like that. So if people want to take a positive from that, they can. It means that we have resources available to us. I think we all understood that anyway to some extent. But, if we're willing to do that, then maybe we can do this somewhere else. So,
I would also say that we did something similar with Sesko in the summer, and then we didn't spend that money after making an offer at a value that we thought was reasonable.
Sure.
So it's one thing showing willing to spend certain money on a certain player at a certain time.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that money will be redirected to anybody else right now.
Well, I think it has to be, because if we want Watkins and we can't get Watkins, it doesn't mean our need is any less great. So we're going to have to do something,
Yeah, it's let's go back to the summer and just look at deadline day. Arsenal had pretty much made their peace with the fact that they weren't going to add an attacker to the squad, and then they did that deal for Sterling, which Edu admitted was not planned. It may be we're now looking at not planned territory. Whatever the market offers us, I think, is probably what we're going to have to be open to between now and the end of Monday.
I've seen, Lewis just sent me a text actually, that Arsenal, among a number of clubs interested in Evan Ferguson, who Brighton have made available on loan this month. But of course, that is an impossibility as it stands, because we have Neto and Raheem Sterling on loan.
After last night, Neto and Sterling, I'm sure most Arsenal fans would be happy to drive to the training ground, pick them up, drive them wherever the hell they need to go, and go and pick up Evan Ferguson straight away afterwards.
Butlins, bring them to Butlins, let them have a nice, relaxing time. Look, before we go, I think we do need to just recircle back on the Myles Lewis-Skelly story. The appeal went in at lunchtime the other day. The appeal was done, dusted, and overturned. The red card, rather, was overturned within a matter of hours. Look, I had plenty to say on the Arsecast Extra, I had plenty to say on the blog. I'm just curious about how you think this decision was reached and whether or not it is something that PGMOL might reflect on in the cold light of day and say, hey, you know what? We got this one really wrong. We need to look at ourselves and how we go about these decisions and make these decisions between the referee on the pitch and the VAR, and let's do better. Or if you think an organisation that doubled down when everybody basically said, you've got this one wrong, will re-entrench the ways in which they've been operating over the last number of years under Howard Webb anyway.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't see them publicly admitting anything, but behind closed doors they must be thinking that they need to improve that VAR ref on field communication further, because frankly it was ridiculous that Oliver wasn't contradicted. I don't know with this decision, is Howard Webb still doing his funny little program on Sky?
I'm sure he is.
New incidents. Like, are we expecting him to focus on this particular incident, given it's had so much press, and to actually explain, oh, we got it wrong? Or is he going to are they going to ignore it? Are they going to go on there and say, oh, actually, we still believe that this was the wrong decision, but it's not our fault that the panel decided to change their mind? I just don't know. I think they really got it wrong. And while Arsenal fans may have, I'm not going to say overreacted, Arsenal fans reacted because of the accumulation of similar incidents over the course of the last few years, right?
Yeah.
But I just, even though it feels like we're going mad screaming about some of this stuff, quite clearly there are issues at the PGMOL that they need to be, held to account for. And they're such a closed shop. We have no idea how they're going to deal with this. And it seems very unlikely for me to imagine that Howard Webb will come out and now try and completely about turn and try and get ahead of this as if it's an opportunity to reform. I don't see it, because they're so bloody stubborn, and their actions in the 48 hours after the decision really underlined that, and actually were really, really quite worrying for the game as a whole, I think, in this country. And I think the Premier League and the FA need to be really looking at this, because they are damaging the product, and the product is worth billions of pounds, and the stakeholders in other clubs, and the clubs are not going to like it. So there's a lot of pressure on them. I don't know if they have it within themselves to actually solve that problem themselves, or whether someone has to come from outside and start dealing with it. But I don't know how you even start to make that happen.
No, I mean, I'd like to think that it would cause some self-reflection and bring about some improvement in refereeing standards, because ultimately I think that's what everybody wants, is at least a bit more transparency, a bit more accountability, and with that I think comes improvement, because you're open to the idea of getting something wrong. They got it wrong, they doubled down, and they're left with egg on their face, as are the minority of their friends in the media who went to bat for PGMOL and went to bat for Michael Oliver and went to bat for Darren England and tried to tell us that, no, actually, this is a red card. You're wrong. You're responsible for the terrible abuse of referees, which literally nobody accepts or condones in any way. And then our unhappiness with that decision and the way the PGMOL reacted was utterly justified by the appeal that the panel heard and then subsequently overturned the red card. So if that doesn't cause some self-reflection at PGMOL headquarters, I don't know what will.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry about Oliver's ability to take charge of Arsenal games. I mean, I have done for a while, but I particularly worry about it now, because he's been the subject of so much abuse. And frankly, if he's human and he feels that abuse is coming from a certain person or a certain section of the, or certain clubs or what have you, how can you not have that in the back of your mind when you take to the pitch to referee those players who represent that club in the future, right?
Yeah.
I mean, someone called me a Leeds fan, Harry Potter specky twat 30 years ago, and I've hated the club ever since. I can hold a grudge, and I continue to do so. I don't expect Michael Oliver not to, but that's kind of where we're at,
Sure.
We've created a bit of a vicious circle where I fully expect him to sort of take it out on us each time now, because we're making it worse. But we're right to make it worse, because we were right to complain about some of these decisions, because frankly they were wrong.
Yes. I don't know the answer either. I do hope for the best. I don't expect the best. Maybe it's naive of me, but I do hope that, what this week has brought about will cause, a little introspection, a little mea culpa, a little common sense and grown-up reaction to, to what happened. Because I think ultimately people appreciate when you can admit you made a mistake and you got something wrong, because we're all human. We all do it. But so far, that hasn't been in the ability of Howard Webb or PGMOL in this circumstance. Okay, we better leave it there. Get this podcast out to everybody. As ever, Andrew, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Catch you next time.
Thank you very much indeed to Andrew. You can find him on BlueSky at alansport.arseblog.com. That's at alansport.arseblog.com. And you can find him on other social media networks as well. So that's just about that for this week's show. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we have a very, very big game this weekend, one we need to win. Not just because we have to keep pace with Liverpool, but because fuck Man City. And you can hear more on that game. You can hear more about team news once we get it bit from Mikel Arteta's press conference on Friday. We'll preview that podcast as we do for all of our Premier League games over on Patreon. That'll be available for you Friday afternoon for instant access. If you're not already an Arseblog member on Patreon, you too can be one of the cool kids by signing up at patreon.com/Arseblog. Patreon.com/Arseblog. Just $6 a month. That's all it takes to get instant access to everything that we do over there. Right, I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks again for being with us. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. And as our cameras turn away from the pitch, we're given exclusive access to the Arsenal Marketing and Merchandise Department, where a very important meeting is taking place. Good morning, everybody. Settle down. Look, I just first want to commend you on a fantastic January. 30 days has September, April, June, and all the other months. But January has 31, and we have successfully managed to launch 37 new ranges of Arsenal merchandise across the month of January. So, fantastic. Round of applause to you all. Just wanted to touch base a little bit about March. Obviously, we've got a lot planned. We've got the clocks going forward again. Everybody loves the longer evenings. That's why we've got the new range of Arsenal parasols, sun hats, sunglasses. Kudos to that man over there. I forget his name, but you know the guy. He's got the glasses and the beard and the trousers that stop, a little bit too high up the shin for my liking. But Arsenal in March. Who else marches? Penguins. That's right. So each Arsenal player will have their own limited edition penguin plushie. We'll be selling those in the Armoury and beyond. And of course, we've got St. Patrick's Day. Patrick Vieira, Pat Rice. We'll have our red, white and blue pre-Patrick's Day merchandise. And then to acknowledge the Irish, or whatever it is they call themselves, we'll have the green merchandise on March 17th as well. But of course, we're here for your ideas, so I'm throwing it open to the floor. Does anybody have any other suggestions or brainwaves? Yes, you there, the other guy with the glasses and the beard and the trousers that stop too short on the shins.
Yeah, I was just sort of wondering if maybe the club might think about spending some of the money on a striker rather than these incredibly complicated merchandise campaigns.
Get out. At this point, we're asked to leave, but our microphones do catch one more interaction before the door closes.
I told you before, I won't stand for this insubordination by a striker. Where do you think you are, a football club? You're fired.